everyone, I am Dr. Sonal Jain, University of Delhi, Department of Anthropology. In this series of lectures of forensic science, we will be discussing about the collection, packaging and forwarding of physical evidences. First, we will run what are the advantages of proper collection of the physical evidences. Whenever we collect any evidences, we have to identify each piece of evidence even after years it was collected. There are certain cases where the evidence is being analyzed after several years. So, in the meantime, the investigating officer, the collection officers, or the person in charge who has received the evidence might not have the proper information about the evidence. So, in such cases, we should identify each piece of evidence, and even after so many years, we can easily identify that what collection has been happened when the evidence is properly marked. It also describes the location and condition of the item at the time it was collected, from where this proper evidence was collected, what was the location, whether this evidence was collected from the outside area or from the inside area, and in what condition this particular item or particular evidence was collected. For example, if there is a crime scene and a blood is being collected from the crime scene, then at that evidence it is properly mentioned that the blood was in dry condition or it was in liquid condition, whether the blood was found on the floor or on the wall, etc. So, a proper collection, maintaining a proper list from where the evidence is being collected is highly advantageous even after the years, when we have to know that which evidence is this, which evidence this case belongs to this evidence, and from where this particular physical evidence was collected, what was the environmental conditions, what was the area from which this evidence was being collected. Also, this proper collection establishes a documentary proof for maintaining a proper chain of custody. As we have discussed in our previous lectures also, that establishing a chain of custody is very important, because if at a certain point there is something wrong with the evidence or the collection, then we can go back and look for the signatures that at what particular point the problem might have happened. So, a proper collection with establishing the proper chain of custody with proper signatures of IO and the person who has received the evidence at the forensic science lab is very important. Also, giving description about any changes which may have occurred in the evidence between the time of collection and the subsequent introduction as evidence in the court. Supposedly, if we have collected some evidence at a particular point and the evidence might deteriorate with time, so we have to give the total description whenever the evidence is being submitted as in the court. We have to give the proper introduction that in this condition the evidence was being collected, these changes have happened during the course of the time, and this is how we have analyzed the evidence. So, a proper description is required in all the cases whenever we collect any evidence. Now, coming to how we will collect if we have found the firearms at the scene of crime. The first thing which we will always keep in mind, that never ever collect the loaded firearms without any prior approval, because there is a chances of misfiring during the process of transportation. Always unload the firearms until and unless you have a prior approval for the collection of a loaded firearm. Then the investigating officer can go ahead with the collection of a loaded firearm. Until the firearm has to be unloaded all the time prior to submission, because the transportation may result in the misfiring. As we unload the weapon, record the exact state in which the weapon was found. Supposedly, we have to note the chamber position, the safety position, whether the safety lock was on or off, in which condition the firearm was lying at the crime scene. We have to report each and everything before unloading the firearm. It has to be noted down along with the signature of the investigating officer. With pistols, we always have to leave the magazine out of the weapon and ensure there are no live rounds in the chamber. The magazine and cartridges can be submitted in the same box if they are secured, and there are no loose cartridges in the box. We have to submit fired cartridge cases and projectiles in separate sealed envelopes or containers, because the cartridge cases or the projectiles, maybe the bullets or any other form of projectile, they have certain marks on them. These marks are these marks are responsible for the identification in the ballistics division. Whenever we submit any cartridge case or bullets, the lines which are there on the cartridge cases are being matched with the test fired cartridge cases. So they should be properly packed in such a way that during transportation there should not be any additional marks because of transportation on cartridge cases or on any bullets or any projectiles. Otherwise, it will hinder in the analysis when we will analyze these cartridge cases or projectiles in the ballistics division of the forensic science lab. A firearm has to be measured properly. We have to see what are the cartridge cases and the projectiles. The number of cartridge cases will tell us that how many rounds have been fired on the crime scene. All the bullets and projectiles should be collected from the crime scene. We must see the cardboard box. As you can see in the picture, that the firearm and the bullets are packed separately. The bullets or the cartridge case or the fired cartridge cases are always packed separately, and the firearm is totally fixed along with the magazine unloaded. And in this cardboard box we keep either some thermocol or some cotton box pieces, etc., so that there won't be any additional marks on these firearms or anything. It should remain in the stable position. Also, whenever the investigating officer is collecting a firearm, the person, the IO, should be highly vigilant, because there might be certain fingerprints or the GSR which is present on this firearm. He should always wear gloves before collection of any firearm. The latent fingerprints might be found on the handle of the firearm, and there could be any blood droplets may be found on this particular firearm. Now, another major evidence which is found at the crime scene are the fingerprints. So there could be latent fingerprints or there could be visible fingerprints. The visible fingerprints are the prints which are directly visible to the naked eye, but latent prints are those prints which are not visible to the naked eye. They are very difficult to identify. In such cases, we have to look for the latent prints very carefully. The investigating officer at the crime scene should be vigilant enough to see where the latent prints can be found. For example, they can be found at the point of entry, from where the criminal might have tried to enter, on the doorknobs, on the windows, etc., or from the door where he might have entered. Those are the areas where fingerprints can be found, or the places he might have touched, doorknobs of the rooms he might have entered, or any safe in the cases of burglary. So an IO should look for all the places where the latent prints can be found. These fingerprints, firstly you have to identify that this surface contains certain fingerprints. The identification can be done through UV light or the alternate source light, and after identification, if it is possible, then the whole piece which contains the fingerprints should be transported to the forensic science lab. But if it is not possible to transfer the whole piece to forensic science lab, in such cases the investigating officer should develop the fingerprints on the spot and lift it from the surface. Depending on the surfaces we have different fingerprint lifting methods. For example, any surface on which fingerprints are there, we always use contrast powder. If the surface is white, we use black powder. If a surface is black, we use grey or white powder, and if the surface is multicolored, we use fluorescent powders for the fingerprint development and after the careful development of the fingerprints, we lift the fingerprints. If it is not possible to lift the fingerprint, then after developing, the investigating officer should tape that area and transfer that object to the forensic science lab where the fingerprint will be analyzed. Generally, packaging of the fingerprint should be conducted in such a manner as to minimize the contact between the object with the possible prints and the surface of the packaging material, so that the fingerprints should not destroy whenever we are transferring the fingerprints from the crime scene to the forensic science lab. After dusting an object, the developed print should be carried out with a lifter, and each lift will have identifying numbers. We have to mention on each and every fingerprint the case number and the lift number. Supposedly, we are at a crime scene and there are certain areas we have found the fingerprints on the door, on the window, on a table, on a safe. Then these are the 4 points: the window, the door, on the table and the safe. The investigating officer should separately collect the fingerprints from 4 different areas and give them different numbers and mention the location. Thus, this particular fingerprint is collected from door, from this window, or from the particular safe, mentioning the case number also, the time also, etc. Any evidence which do not have proper marking will always return unexamined, because if we are unable to lift the developed fingerprint, we must cover the print with lifting tape or firmly secure the dusted object within a box. Any item with a porous surface such as paper can be placed in an envelope and forwarded to the laboratory for chemical processing. Usually, when we have a paper with a fingerprint, we develop using chemical methods, and that can result in the destruction of the evidence. So, the porous surfaces should be transferred as such to the forensic science lab for the analysis, but the big surfaces which cannot be transferred to the forensic science lab should be examined then and there at the crime scene. A polylight is always used, made up of a powerful lamp containing the UV, visible and infrared components of light. It screens down the light into separate color bands and helps us in the location of fingerprints whenever the latent prints are present at the crime scene. The use of fluorescent improvement procedures sprays a light source significantly upsurges the kinds of planes from which a latent fingerprint can be identified. So, a polylight can be used or a UV light can be used by an investigating officer who can look at the possible surfaces using the light, and the latent fingerprints can be visualized using such light. Whenever we have identified the surface, as you can see the surface is white, we can use the black powder. We have to use a camel brush and we have to look in which direction the ridges are flowing. The direction of ridges will tell us we have to move the brush in the direction left to right or right to left, so that fingerprint is not being destroyed. Very carefully, with minimum pressure, camel brush with very light amount of powder is being brushed on the handprint or the fingerprint which is being identified by the investigating officer. After the clear identification, it should be well taped, and if it is possible, then you should lift it and put it on different paper. Otherwise, you should tape it and transfer the whole lifted fingerprint to the forensic science lab. The flow of ridges we can see from left to right, and in that direction the brush should be moved. We should also scale it, that what is the total dimension of this fingerprint, as well as we can photograph it. We can see the surface was multicolored, so a fluorescent powder was used and a beautiful fingerprint was developed using the fluorescent powder. Now, if you have found certain question documents at the scene of crime, then the question document examinations can be conducted on any printed, written or typed materials when their origin is unknown or the authenticity is in doubt. Question documents could be any document which is under question. That could be any handwriting material, any suicide note, any handwriting on check, any printed documents, or any financial document like will, etc., or power of attorney, etc. These documents, whenever either they are forged or under question, they are known as question documents. The question documents division of forensic science also examines other documents like your passports, your currency examination, or your educational certificates, etc. So whenever authenticity is under question for all these documents, they are being sent to the question documents division. The question documents might also contain certain fingerprints of the person who might have signed those documents or forged those documents. So the investigating officer, if he is collecting question documents, he should look for any latent prints. Firstly, the latent prints will be examined because the latent prints will give us the fingerprints and they are unique to a person, and in such cases we can identify the person who has done the forgery. So a latent fingerprint examination must be conducted prior to question document examination or in addition to question document examination. If we have any question document where handwriting is under question, then for comparing those documents which are under question, we need some standards. What could be the standards? Standards could be the original handwriting of the person who is the suspect, and or the writing which is being written that time only, and if the document which is under question is old, like 10 years, 20 years, then we need handwriting of the person, contemporary handwriting of that era, because the handwriting of a person might change depending on his age or at what position and at what surface the person might have written. So whenever there is a document which is under question, we should always submit originals for questioned and known items. Never submit the faxed copies, because whenever the question document analyst, they are analyzing any evidences, they look for the tremors in handwriting or any other specific characteristics which are only visible in originals. They are not visible in faxed copies, etc. So they always submit it in the original condition. Now we were talking about the standards from which these question documents will be being compared. These known standards can be obtained through the requested handwriting or from genuine handwriting samples. We can request any person for the standard examination, or we can take the handwriting sample which is being written by a person previously. The standard should always be packaged separately from question samples and they should be marked. Thus, this Q1 is the handwriting sample which is under question. This S1 is standard 1 which is being sent for the comparison. The person, the investigating officer, if he is taking handwriting samples, he should take multiple samples from the person, because there are certain natural variations which comes in handwriting. These are genuine variations, and if a person will write the similar thing 10 or 15 times, then all the natural variations can be captured and it would be easier for a question document analyst to analyze the handwriting. If more than one set of standards are submitted, they must be packaged separately. As I have told, the question should be marked Q1, the standards should be marked separately S1, S2, S3 as number of, depending on how many standards are being submitted. Each question document should be packaged in individual containers, that is 3 separate question envelopes and letters to be submitted, and each should be in a separate container. So depending on what type of material, if we have a paper, they should be packed properly in an envelope, and different question documents should be packed in different envelopes because they might contain handwriting of different persons, and the different standards should always be packed in different envelopes, and then they can be together packed in a big envelope, properly marked that this envelope contains this number of question documents and this number of standard handwriting documents for comparison. Moving forward, Another major type of evidences which can be found at the crime scene are the imprints and impression evidence from the footwear or the tire tracks, which are commonly encountered. Whenever we have a footprint or a tire mark, firstly we have to photograph the evidence at a 90-degree angle with a scale in the same plane as the impression prior to collection, because it is quite possible that the tire marks as well as footprints are in the outside area, and chances of getting that evidence destroyed is very high because of environmental conditions or because of a lot of people who might to come to visit the crime scene. So either before collection, if we have tire tracks and there is some delay in the collection, the investigating officer should cover that particular impression, either the footwear impression or the tire track impression, with something so that the evidence should not get destroyed. If possible, we can seize the article on which the imprint is located if it is possible, but if it is not possible to seize the article, then we have to collect the footprint or the tire mark from the surface on which it is present. Lifting methods can collect some types of imprints. For example, as we have seen for the fingerprints, that certain footprints can be or certain tire marks can be lifted. Another way of collection of footprints and tire marks are casting with dental stone. They can collect impressions in dirt, sand, snow, etc. Suspect samples should be seized as soon as possible to minimize any additional wear which can affect the individual characteristic. In footwear examination, the size of the footwear is a class characteristic. For example, many people can wear a size 8 or size 9, but the individual characteristics are present in the base of the footwear which have come due to the additional wear and tear. So, if an investigating officer might locate a person that this is a suspect who has certain individual characteristics present in his footwear, he should look for such individual characteristics and should collect those as soon as possible. Known shoes and tires should be also collected for comparison purposes. If a footprint is present on the dirt, then it can be collected using either the dental or we can use electrostatic method for capturing the footwear for the same. Through the proper collection of evidences, we can maintain a proper chain of custody, as well as the proper collection of evidences can be used whenever there is a delay in the cases, with the proper signature of the IO and the proper person who has received those evidences at the forensic science lab. A proper evidence collection maintains a wholesome approach that will help us in the proper analysis of the forensic evidences. Thank you.